Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
On a quiet late afternoon, John parks his car in the garage of his house, feeling that familiar relief that always comes over him when he arrives home. His day at the office had been intense, but he finds comfort in thinking about the comfortable routine he shares with Clara. When he opens the door, he's greeted by the gentle clinking of pots in the kitchen and the cozy aroma of something being cooked. "Hi, honey," he says as he walks to the kitchen, where Clara is facing the counter, chopping vegetables with precision. She's wearing a simple but elegant apron, and her hair is pulled back into a bun that always makes him smile. He watches for a moment before kissing her on the forehead. "What are we cooking today?" "Pasta with homemade tomato sauce," Clara replies without looking away from the cutting board. Her voice sounds normal, but there's something in her tone, something John can't quite figure out right away. He steps closer to help, as he sometimes does, but she gently declines, saying, "I've got this. Why don't you go relax on the couch for a bit? You must be tired." John feels the first hint of unease. Clara rarely acts this way. Cooking together has always been one of their moments of connection, even on ordinary days. He hesitates but obeys. He goes to the living room, turns on the TV, and tries to get distracted by the news, but his thoughts are on Clara. He can't shake the feeling that something is off. After a few minutes, he goes back to the kitchen, unable to ignore his intuition. He finds her staring at the pot on the stove, stirring the sauce slowly, with a distant look in her eyes. She doesn't even notice he's there until he touches her shoulder. Clara startles slightly, as if she's been pulled out of a deep thought. "Everything okay?" John asks, his concern now more obvious in his voice. "Yes, of course," she answers quickly, but there's a slight tremor in her voice that John can't ignore. He doesn't push her right then, but he watches as she finishes making dinner. Something is definitely different. She seems to be there physically, but her mind is somewhere else. When they finally sit at the table, Clara seems more reserved than usual. John tries to strike up a conversation, asking about her day at the hospital. She responds with short phrases, without the enthusiasm and details that usually accompany her work stories. He listens, but he can tell something is bothering her. Then, in the middle of dinner, Clara sets her utensils down on the table gently and takes a deep breath. John watches, feeling his heart tighten. He knows something is coming, but he has no idea what. "John," she begins, hesitating, looking at him with a mix of apprehension and vulnerability. "I want to ask you something, and I need you to hear me out without judging." "Of course," he replies, trying to keep his voice calm, though tension is already gripping his chest. "Mike is in town," she says, pausing for a moment as if gauging his reaction. The name hangs in the air like a spark about to ignite something bigger. John feels the weight of the moment, but forces himself to keep a neutral expression. "He sent me a message," Clara goes on, "and asked if I'd like to grab a coffee, just to chat and catch up on how we're both doing. It's something casual, but I thought I should tell you before making any decision." John feels a whirlwind inside him. He knows Clara's history with Mike, or at least what she chose to share with him. It had been years of ups and downs, intense emotions that Clara always described as draining. When she told him about the end of that relationship, she said she was ready to move on and build something new, something more stable. And she did that with him. But now, hearing Mike's name all of a sudden, John doesn't know how to react. He slowly sets his fork down, trying to buy time to process what he just heard. "Do you want to go?" he asks, choosing his words carefully. His voice is calm, but inside, he feels a growing unease. "I'm not sure," Clara answers, lowering her eyes to her plate. "I don't think there's anything wrong with meeting someone from the past, as long as everything is out in the open. But I don't want to do it if it's going to make you uncomfortable. That's why I wanted to hear your thoughts." John stays quiet for a few seconds, the kind of silence that feels like it lasts forever. He knows he trusts Clara, but he can't deny that Mike's name brings a shadow he wishes would stay buried. Finally, he sighs and says, "If you think it's important, I won't stop you. But, to be honest, I'm not completely at ease with the idea." Clara nods slightly, taking in his words. They finish dinner in a silence that feels heavier than before. And even though they've spoken, John senses that the real conversation is still ahead. That night, as the silence spread through the house, John stayed in bed, unable to sleep. He watched Clara beside him, already asleep. Her face, lit by the soft glow of the lamp, looked peaceful, but John knew that behind that calmness lay something deeper. He couldn't shake the restlessness that had taken hold of him since dinner. Mike's name echoed in his mind, as if it had stirred memories he never wanted to explore. It wasn't jealousy, or at least that's what he tried to convince himself. It was something more complex, a mix of doubt, insecurity, and, above all, fear. He turned onto his side, trying to find a comfortable position, but his mind was in a completely different place. Mike. John knew enough about him to understand that, at some point, he had been a big part of Clara's life. She had shared parts of that relationship, enough for him to know it had been intense but also unstable. Mike was the kind of man who enters someone's life like a storm, thrilling, unpredictable, and ultimately destructive. And even though Clara always said she felt nothing for him anymore, the mere fact that she was considering seeing him brought a heaviness John didn't know how to handle. The next morning, John tried to stick to his usual routine, but the uneasiness followed him around like a shadow. While he sipped his coffee, Clara was in the kitchen getting her own breakfast ready before leaving for the hospital. The silence between them was almost tangible. John wanted to ask if she'd made a decision about meeting Mike, but something held him back. Maybe it was fear of the answer. He knew he'd have to trust her, but that trust was being tested in a way he never anticipated. At work, John found himself increasingly distracted. His co-workers called him into meetings, but he could barely focus on the discussions. His mind kept returning to the night before, to Clara's face as she talked about Mike. It was an expression he'd never seen on her, and it bothered him deeply. He wondered, why now? Why, after all these years, did Mike have to show up? During his lunch break, John picked up his phone, thinking about texting Clara. He typed and deleted his message several times, struggling to find the right words. "Have you decided yet?" felt too blunt. "How's your day?" felt too shallow. He ended up putting his phone back in his pocket, frustrated with himself. It wasn't just the situation that bothered him, but the feeling that he was losing control of something so important to him. When he got home that night, he found Clara in the living room with a book in her hands. She gave him a slight smile, but there was something in her eyes that John recognized right away: hesitation. After a quieter dinner than the night before, Clara spoke up. "I decided not to go," she said, without beating around the bush. "It's not worth it. I don't want this to become a problem for us." John felt immediate relief, but at the same time, something about Clara's tone made him uneasy. There was a forced calm in her voice, like she was trying to end the conversation before it went any deeper. He thanked her, trying not to show the mix of emotions he felt. On one hand, he was glad she'd chosen to put their relationship first. On the other, he couldn't ignore the fact that even after that decision, his restlessness continued to grow. That night, John went to bed earlier than usual, but sleep once again refused to come. He knew something had changed, even though Clara insisted everything was fine. It was as if simply mentioning Mike had opened a door they'd kept closed for years. And even though she'd chosen not to step through it, John felt it was still slightly ajar, waiting to be confronted. The following days brought changes John couldn't ignore. Clara seemed busier than ever, working longer hours at the hospital and often coming home late. When she did get home, she was always exhausted, and their conversations became rare. Though she tried to hide it with smiles and quick comments about work, John could tell something was different. There was a distance that hadn't existed before, a growing gap each day, as if they were living in separate worlds under the same roof. One night, while Clara was showering, her phone buzzed on the living room table. John, sitting on the couch, glanced at it by instinct when he heard the sound. It was a message. He tried to ignore it, but the lit-up screen showed the name of a coworker Clara sometimes mentioned, a surgeon named Ethan. The message was brief, something like, "Need to talk to you about today's case. Call me when you can." It seemed harmless, but John couldn't help his mind from drifting to scenarios he'd rather not imagine. The uneasiness grew inside him, but he knew it would be irrational to confront Clara over a simple text. Still, the message planted a seed of doubt. That same night, as Clara slept beside him, John found himself staring at the ceiling again, lost in thought. Her decision not to see Mike should have closed that chapter, but instead it felt like the start of something bigger. John began to question not just Clara's actions, but his own insecurities. He trusted her, or did he? The question kept echoing in his mind, refusing to go away. The weeks that followed brought more signs he couldn't interpret. Clara, who had always been open and talkative, became more reserved. Little changes in her behavior started standing out. She spent more time on her phone, though she was more careful not to leave it lying around. When he asked about her day, her answers were vague, almost automatic. It wasn't just work wearing her out, John was sure of it. One night, while Clara was on an overnight shift, John decided to organize some papers in the home office. He knew that going through her things would be a breach of privacy, so he promised himself he wouldn't. But as he was putting away an envelope, a small notebook fell off a shelf. It was Clara's journal, something she rarely mentioned. It opened to a recent page, and though John knew he should close it right away, his eyes landed on a sentence that seemed to shine on the page: "Sometimes I miss who I was before all this." He stood frozen for a few seconds, the weight of those words settling on him like a stone. Before all this. What did that mean? Before their marriage? Before him? Or was it something else entirely? He quickly shut the journal, feeling a mix of guilt and concern. It wasn't his place to read that, but it was too late. The words were already etched in his mind, fueling the uncertainties that were consuming him. The next morning, he tried to act normal while Clara had her coffee and got ready to leave. He watched her closely, looking for some sign or clue about what was going on. But Clara seemed calm, like nothing was wrong. It left him even more confused. Was it possible everything was in his head? That he was overreacting, creating problems where none existed? But there was something John couldn't ignore, the persistent sense that Clara was pulling away. He felt like he was trying to hold on to sand, and the tighter he gripped, the more it slipped away. He didn't know if it was real or just his own insecurities, but one thing was certain: their marriage was changing, and he needed to figure out why before it was too late. That night, while Clara was in the shower, John sat on the living room couch, holding a cup of cold coffee. His mind swirled with a mix of anxiety and determination. The journal, the messages, the growing distance between them, it all felt like signs pointing to something he couldn't name, but was deeply afraid of. He knew he couldn't ignore it anymore. It was time to have the conversation he'd been avoiding. It was time to confront Clara. When she came out of the bathroom, steam still trailing behind her, she looked more tired than ever. She wore her favorite pajamas, a gift from him in the early years of their marriage. John felt a tightness in his chest as he remembered how simple things used to be back then, how her laughter used to fill the house. But now, the silence between them was so heavy it felt like a physical barrier. "Clara," he began, his voice low but firm. She paused, drying her hair, surprised by the seriousness in his tone. "Can we talk?" She hesitated for a moment before sitting down next to him. "Sure," she said, sounding tired. "What is it?" John took a deep breath, like he was about to dive into unknown waters. I feel like something's going on. Something you're not telling me. Clara frowned, looking genuinely confused, or maybe just pretending. He couldn't tell. What do you mean, John? Why do you think that? Because you've changed, he said, words pouring out faster than he intended. You're distant. You're always at the hospital, but when you come back, it's like your head is still somewhere else. And I don't want to be here imagining things. I need to know, what's happening. For a moment, Clara just stared at him. Her eyes, usually so expressive, were now like a wall. John wondered if she was choosing her words carefully or deciding whether to trust him enough to tell the truth. It's nothing, John, she finally said, sounding more defensive than reassuring. Work has been tough, and maybe I'm more tired than usual. But that doesn't mean something's wrong between us. He shook his head, frustrated. I'm not saying there's something wrong between us. I'm saying I feel like you're carrying something on your own, something you don't want to share with me. Clara looked away, and John knew he'd hit a nerve. There was a truth there, something she was fighting to hide. He reached out to take her hand, but she gently pulled away. John, she said in a near whisper. I didn't want it to come to this. I didn't want to worry you. Come to what? He asked, heart pounding. She hesitated again, and when she finally spoke, her voice was filled with emotions she seemed to have held back for a long time. I've been thinking a lot about my life lately. About who I am, who I was before I met you. It's not about you, it's about me. Sometimes I feel like I lost part of myself over the years, and I don't know how to find it again. Her words hit John like a punch. He didn't know what he was expecting to hear, but it certainly wasn't that. You lost part of yourself? He repeated, trying to understand. What does that mean, Clara? You're not happy? It's not that, she replied quickly, but he sensed she was trying to convince herself as much as him. I love you, I love our life together. But sometimes I feel like there are parts of me I left behind, that I let go in the past. And when Mike got in touch, it brought back memories I thought I was over. Mike's name hung in the air like a crushing weight. John felt a surge of anger and sadness. He wanted to shout, but he forced himself to stay calm. So it's about him? He asked, unable to hide his bitterness. No. Clara practically shouted. It's not about him. It's about me, John. About who I am. I don't have feelings for him, but his message reminded me that before us, I was someone else. And maybe I'm afraid that by becoming the Clara you love, I lost the Clara I used to be. John stayed silent, processing her words. He wanted to comfort her, to tell her she hadn't lost anything, that she was perfect just the way she was. But deep down, he knew that wouldn't be enough. There was something deeper, something he couldn't fix for her. Why didn't you tell me before? He finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Because I was scared, Clara answered, eyes brimming with tears. Scared you'd think I don't love you. Scared it would push you away. But, John, I need to be honest with myself and with you. John felt tears burning at the corners of his eyes, but he held them back. He knew he had to be strong at that moment, not just for himself but for Clara. He took her hand, this time firmly, and looked into her eyes. If you feel like you've lost something, then let's find it together, he said. I don't want you to carry this alone. Whatever it is, I'm here. Clara finally let her tears fall, and for the first time in weeks, John felt the distance between them begin to shrink. But he also knew this talk was just the beginning of something much bigger, something they would have to face together. The next morning, the house felt wrapped in a heavy silence. Clara was in the kitchen making coffee, but her movements were tense, as though she was weighed down by something she could no longer hide. John came downstairs and immediately sensed something was off. He couldn't explain why, but his gut feeling warned him. Morning, he said, trying to sound normal, but the tone of his voice betrayed his unease. Clara gave a slight nod, her eyes not leaving the coffee maker. The atmosphere was uncomfortable, like they both knew an unavoidable conversation was about to happen. "Clara," John began, sitting at the table, "is there something you want to tell me?" She stopped for a moment, took a deep breath, and turned to face him. Her eyes were red, as if she hadn't slept all night. "John. I need to be honest with you." His heart started pounding, and he felt a surge of heat run through his body. Still, he tried to remain calm. "What is it, Clara?" he asked, dreading the answer. "I met up with Mike yesterday," she said, her voice low, almost inaudible. John's world seemed to freeze. He blinked a few times, trying to absorb what he'd just heard. "But you said you weren't going," he replied, voice wavering between disbelief and hurt. "You said you cancelled." "I know," she said, tears beginning to flow. "But I was confused, John. I needed to figure something out inside me." He stood up abruptly, as if the ground had disappeared under his feet. "But it was just coffee, right, Clara?" he asked, his voice louder now, almost begging. "Clara, tell me it was just coffee. Please, Clara, say it was just coffee." Clara looked at him, guilt in her eyes. "John," she began, but no words came out. He took a step forward, pressing her. "Tell me, Clara. It was just coffee?" She took a deep breath, unable to hold his gaze any longer. "I'm sorry, John," she finally said. Her words echoed in John's mind. He stepped back, as if he'd been physically hit. "I'm sorry," he repeated, bitterness filling his voice. "So it wasn't just coffee." Clara tried to explain. "It was a mistake, John. It was insecurity, it was confusion. It doesn't mean anything. I regret it so much. He's already left town, I swear it'll never happen again." But John was no longer listening. He shook his head, like he was trying to escape a nightmare. "I need to get out of here," he said, his voice colder than ever. He went upstairs, grabbed some clothes, and came back down. Clara tried to stop him, holding his arm. "John, please. Don't do this. I love you. I don't want to lose you." He gently pulled away without looking at her. "Clara, you already lost me," he said before walking out the door. John went straight to a hotel. Sitting on the bed with his suitcase still beside him, he picked up his phone and called a longtime friend, who was a lawyer. "I need your help," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "I want a divorce." The process was painful and dragged on. For weeks, they spoke only as much as necessary through their lawyers. John never went back home, and Clara respected his wish to keep distance. She tried contacting him a few times, but he didn't respond. During the separation, Clara, filled with remorse, realized she needed to resolve the issues that were still unsettled within her. She went after Mike, determined to make things clear. When she found him, she spoke directly. "Mike, I was wrong to meet up with you. But I want you to know there's nothing left between us. I don't want to relive the past, I don't want you. I'm at a different point in my life now, and even though I'm alone, there's no place for us." Mike tried to insist, but Clara stood her ground. She knew she needed to move forward on her own. Meanwhile, John made an important decision. He left town and went back to his hometown, a place that brought back memories of simpler, happier times. There, he reconnected with old friends, people who helped him remember who he was before everything happened. He began building a new life, one marked not by regret, but by lessons learned. Clara, now on her own, also began her journey of self-discovery. Even though she was devastated by the separation, she knew she had to face her own issues before she could move on. And so, two lives that had once been intertwined took separate paths, each seeking a fresh start amidst the wreckage of what had once been a marriage. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.